Many parents today are really concerned about the influence society has on their kids. From the classroom to television to social media, our children are inundated with messages they're sometimes not equipped to handle or even comfortable with. How can we really help keep our kids safe and prepare them to walk in God's ways amidst all of this? Joining us now to talk about it is Bree Stensrud. Bree is the director of Women of Welcome and the co-author of the book, The Biggest, Best Light, and she joins us now from Colorado Springs, Colorado. Bree, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you for having me, Hal.
You bet. Now, first of all, tell us what really sparked you to write this book and discuss the timing of releasing it right now.
I think when you look around in our country, everybody has a story, and everybody wants to be seen, and yet we all are categorized in some way, and the culture just seeks to divide us in so many different ways. And so this was a book that was really important to get out about really shining God's light on other people who are made in the image of God.
So which age demographic of kids is the book really aimed at, and what are you hoping will really be the biggest takeaway from this book?
The book is really aimed at elementary age kids. It's a really core message about loving people as God would and seeing people as God would. And sometimes the way that we live our lives doesn't put us in close proximity to people that we should see and we should care about and that maybe are more vulnerable in our society. And so this is a book that hopefully helps our elementary age kids really dig into and start looking for and seeing people as God does and loving them as He would.
You know, I remember when my kids were younger, I mean, they're adults now, but when they were elementary school age, they were, quite influential as well. You could have a very strong influence on them, and then they tried to be an influence on their classmates at the same time. So let's talk about the importance of maybe planting the seeds with kids when they're really young.
Yeah, I mean, our kids at this age, in the elementary school age, they're like sponges. And even before that, they can talk and verbalize, they're acting, they're mimicking all of the ways in which we do things. So, as parents, it's really important not only that we put a lot of really good literature, like obviously the scriptures and other books that uplift those morals and values that we care very deeply about, but that we also live in these ways too, so that it's not something that just seems like a story, but it's something that's the story of your family. It's the way in which you guys live your lives. That you are looking out for people who might be needy. You are looking out for people who might be lost in different kinds of societal holes and cracks that everyone tends to fall through in really tough times.
Do you think some of the biblical stories still really resonate with the kids today, especially the story of David and Goliath, and of course of Jesus and his sacrifice and God's saving grace?
I mean, part of this book really talks about how all of our sin has created so many shadows in which we can't really see people as God sees them. And so it talks about really kind of stepping out into God's light and shining God's light into the world, and how sometimes that can be a scary thing when someone doesn't look like you or talk like you or think like you. But they're made in the image of God. And so, again, as the world would seek to divide us, Christians are called to really preserve the unity of the Spirit and the bonds of peace. And so, this book talks about how Jesus comes down and He's the one that helps us really shine that light through His Holy Spirit into the lives of others.
Amen. Now, Bree, let's talk about the message you want to try and get across to parents through your book.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it goes back to how do we model living God's light in this world to our kids? Are we taking risks and steps towards people who aren't like us, that maybe don't really fit in our kind of curated lives that we tend to have as churchgoers? We can kind of get in a rhythm and a routine that's very comfortable for us. And Jesus was constantly seeking out those who had been forgotten or marginalized, and He shined a light on them, so much so that they ended up in the Bible. And those are the stories that we continue to tell our kids and we pass along. So I think it's really important for parents to not only read the scriptures in the home, but to model what that really looks like, to be looking out for the marginalized and to be seeing people as God does, beyond all of the different kind of labels that culture would really have us put on people.
You know, it's funny, when I was a kid, my father used to say, son, do as I say, not as I do. But as
Right.
Christian parents, it's kind of the opposite. Do as I do. So you have to try and lead a perfect example for your kids.
And that's really hard to do, especially when you're in a routine and you've got, multiple kids going to multiple activities and all that. It's like, where do you make time to really get into some of these cracks and crevices of the culture where maybe people are really lost and forgotten and really hurting that aren't really just in your normal sphere of life. And so it will take something, it will cost you something to engage with people who aren't in that close proximity to you. But there is power in proximity. When Jesus got close to people, that's when he changed their life. That's when his saving grace was brought right to them. And I think it was unavailable for so many people in the Bible. And then Jesus came down and said, it's available for everybody.
So, Bree, how can moms and dads really use this book to help nurture and teach their children?
Yeah, I think this is one of the kind of core books that you can put in your library of reading at night that really explains what the image of God is. And right from Genesis 1:26 and 27, we care about vulnerable people. We are pro-life people because we care about each and every person who is made in the image and likeness of God. So this book really talks about image bearers, about what it means to be made in God's likeness and how that looks different and how that's to be appreciated over every category of people that you see. So I do think this is a great discussion tool to have that explains the Imago Dei and that also helps our kids see different people in a new light. And I think that that's very helpful for parents to have in the library of all of the theological stuff we're trying to, impart to our kids. This is a core theological book for an elementary age kid.
So, how do you feel this book really helps us address issues such as equality and human dignity, the sanctity of life, sin, and true, meaningful purpose with our children?
You know, this book really does kind of cover illustratively, being pro-life, being whole life from womb to tomb. And so our kids, there's illustrations in here. And I don't think I've ever seen a book like this that has illustrations of depicting a child in the womb. We have illustrations of, okay, so you might not see a child in the womb from the outside, but there is a human being flourishing inside of a woman. And so there are just different depictions through the illustrations that show you where people might be hidden and maybe feel unseen, but what it looks like to engage with those people and what it looks like to trust God to engage you in those certain places that might feel a little tricky, might feel a little bit scary, but this book, because of the illustrator and the illustrations that have been done, are really taking you through the whole gamut and the whole pro-life ethic and looking at people as image bearers, even though they look so different from everybody else.
So, what are some of the simple, practical ways we can teach our children to be image bearers of God to those around them so they can be a good influence?
Yeah, I think what people are looking for is just like you said, do as I say, not as I do. It's the nowadays people really want to see people doing what they say that they believe, that they prioritize what they say that they value. And I think what that means is sometimes some of our families are going to really have to take a hard look at, are we are we are we facing the vulnerable? Are we creating time? Are we creating space to be inconvenienced? I mean, we only really love as well as our willingness to be inconvenienced. So is your family ever inconvenienced for the sake of others? And if so, I think that looks like the heart of Christ. I think that looks like Jesus's life, being inconvenienced to love on and appreciate other people that might not just be in your normal circle of life.
Now, as parents, most of us really don't feel qualified to teach our children about theology, but your book, however, lays out God's plan quite clearly. How does the book really help parents share their own spiritual journey and story with their children?
Well, it's really great because at the very beginning of the book, we just talk about, this is what God intended. And God created the world in this great, big, wonderful light. And then it was our sin that brought in all of these kind of sinful shadows that hurt and harmed people and made them feel unseen. And sometimes those shadows, hiding people in shadows, made other people more powerful, and people fed off of that power. And it does have questions in the back of the book that parents can ask with their kids, like, who do you think feels unseen in our family? Who do you think feels unseen in our community? What is the way you think maybe we could do a better job of seeing people or loving on people? So there are some discussion questions, there's scripture in here. And so I do think it's a conversational tool that parents can use to say, you know what, I remember this. And there's going to be some illustrations that some kids that are younger are not going to understand, maybe. They're going to be like, and it's meant to prompt questions and to have deep discussion with your kids. So we meant that on purpose.
Do you have any tips on how a family can maybe weave the concepts of the book into their prayer or devotional life?
Yeah, I think as we as we sit down with our kids and we think through who's hurting in this country and who's who's angry in this country, usually we can tend to think like, oh, we want to pray for our enemies, we want to pray for people we don't like, or we only want to pray for people we do like. I do think this is an opportunity for us to ask God to help us see people better and to engage with people better. So if anything from like a mean kid at school, seeing that kid, being curious about why that child is hurting you because maybe he's hurt, and what that looks like to shine light on maybe someone in your own family that feels forgotten, and engage with that conversation and with that person better. So I do think that this will bring up a lot of really good, healthy conversations that you guys as a family will begin to have some ideas about how you might be able to enter into different spaces better, even in your own life.
So let's say you sit down with your son or daughter, elementary school aged, and they're being bullied at school. And you know your child wants to shine the light and be an example of God's love. But at the same time, they don't want to put up with a lot of the bullying in school. What do you say to that child in a loving, comforting way, but at the same time, that child wants to stand up for themselves?
Hmm. Yeah. So we just had this issue with my own daughter who's in fourth grade, and one of the things, she came home for weeks just crying about a girl that was bullying her at school. And we sat down every night, and it gave us, God uses those opportunities for us to pray for that other little girl. But also, I just kept reminding her, you know what? We have to stay curious about her because nobody just hurts someone for no reason. It's usually hurt people hurt people. So what do we
Right.
do? We don't take abuse, but what do we do to stay curious, like keep our heart open to try and understand maybe what it is? And what ended up happening was 4 weeks later of us crying and praying together every night just to stay curious and to stay open, found out that little girl, her family's going through a divorce. And
Wow.
so and her father is abusive at home. And
Wow.
so it just gave us a little, staying curious helped us be empathetic towards her. And so we didn't retaliate. We just decided to pray. And we kind of made some people aware just to kind of be on the lookout. But then when we found that out, they are now really good friends. It only took staying curious and just entering in and just saying, I'm so sorry. I don't know why you're hurtful to me. It sounds like you might be hurt, and I'm here if you need me. And we just walk through that. And I think staying curious and then just also trying to be for people. Like there's something obviously going on with that other person. And so to think, okay, Jesus cares just about as much about them as he does about my daughter and how much that person's hurting. Same with my daughter. And to be open for God to really show you how to have a deep level of compassion and empathy for someone else that might be hurtful to you.
Yeah, instead of fighting fire with fire, you fight fire with love and make a real difference in that other person's life. And then they'll take notice, like, you're different, you're special. Let's talk, you know. You didn't lash out at me like the way I lashed out at you, so that can open somebody's eyes and their heart. Now, with all of the stark differences in today's divided world, Bree, what advice do you have for us to be able to see others as image bearers?
Mhm. I think this can be really difficult and it's not natural for us to do, unfortunately. But I do think it goes back to staying curious about people. In my line of work that I do advocacy work, and a lot of the times, a lot of the questions, a lot of the comments that come to my way are really divisive, and they're very, hot rhetoric. And when I respond with calmness and with peace and with sincerity, people are very shocked at that. And I think that Christians have a really big opportunity in this really divided and heated culture to show up in a different way and to stay curious when other people have already made decisions and labeled. I think labels are lazy. So it's like if you want to really show up as we believe Christ would, why don't we show up with curiosity instead of condemnation? Why don't we show up with with empathy instead of judgment? And I think that that's going to be a way forward. And I think that it's a discipline. It's not something natural. And I think as we find empathy for people, then we start to realize this is someone who's just like me. It was pain that was coming out. So I do think that if we stay curious, we'll be able to have good conversations that allow us to really connect with other people and see them as image bearers.
And if you have a cool hat like yours, that's also a good conversation starter too, right?
I guess so.
Now, any final thoughts on how we as parents can best equip our kids to be safe and be light bearers out in maybe a dark world?
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I think that is really what American culture kind of looks for, is to provide safety and to provide kind of this screening of anything negative that's going to come into our way. And I think that Jesus lived in a completely opposite direction, in which he said, I'm going to walk through Samaria. I know you guys usually take a 2-day external route around Samaria, but I'm going to go through Samaria and we're going to meet some people that you guys would never talk to. And it's probably going to offend your sensibilities. But I'm going to actually tell her that I'm the Messiah before I tell anybody else, this woman at the well. And so I think that sometimes the ways that we engage people are not going to feel super safe to us. But I think that Jesus is always going to be with us. And if it comes to showing compassion and love to an image bearer, Matthew 25 is really clear about entering into all those spaces where people are hungry, where they're in prison, where they're in need, where they're sojourning, where they have no clothing. Like, some of these places that you find people and engage with those people are not necessarily like the safest places of town or the safest conversations to be in, but those are the conversations that I think that we're made for, because Jesus had those conversations and he told us to go and do likewise. So I I think that we have to take some steps forward and do some light shining as parents ourselves.
Bree Stensrud is the director of Women of Welcome and a co-author of the book, The Biggest Best Light. Thanks for joining us today from Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Thanks, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.